Roll of thunder, hear my cry. Mildred D. Taylor. Chapter 3, Part 1. By the end of October, the rain had come, falling heavily upon the 6-inch layer of dust which had had its own way for more than 2 months. At first, the rain had merely splotched the dust, which seemed to be rejoicing in its own resiliency and laughing at the heavy drops thudding against it. But eventually, the dust was forced to surrender to the mastery of the rain, and it churned into fine red mud that oozed between our toes and slopped against our ankles as we marched miserably to and from school. To shield us from the rain, Mama issued us dry calf skins, which we flung over our heads and shoulders like stiff cloaks. We were not very fond of the skins, for once they were they emitted a musty odor which seeped into our clothing and clung to our skins. We preferred to do without. Unfortunately, Mama cared very little about what we preferred. Since we usually left for school after Mama, we solved this problem by dutifully cloaking ourselves with the skins before leaving home. As soon as we were beyond Big Ma's eagle eyes, we threw off the cloaks and depended upon the overhanging of limbs of the forest trees to keep us dry. Once at school, we donned the cloaks again and marched into our respective classrooms, properly attired. If we had been faced only with the prospect of rain soaking through our clothing each morning and evening, we could have more easily endured the journey between home and school. But as it was, we also had to worry about the Jefferson Davis school bus zooming from behind and splashing us with the murky waters of the road. Knowing that the bus driver liked to entertain his passengers by sending us slipping along the road to the almost inaccessible forest banks washed to a smooth baldness by the constant rains, we continuously looked over our shoulders when we were between the two crossroads so that we could reach the bank before the bus was upon us. But sometimes the rain pounded so heavily that it was all we could do to stay upright, and we did not look back as often nor listen as carefully as we should. We consequently found ourselves comical objects to the cruel eyes that gave no thought to our misery. No one was more angered by the humiliation than little man. Although he had asked Mama the first day of school why Jefferson Davis had 2 buses and Great Faith had none, he had never been totally satisfied by her answer. She had explained to him, as she had explained to Christopher John the year before, and to me 2 years before that the county did not provide buses for its black students. In fact, she said that the county provided very little, and much of the money which supported the black schools came from the black churches. Great Faith Church just could not afford a bus, so therefore we had to walk. This information cut deeply into little man's brain, and each day when he found his clean clothes splashed red by the school bus, he became more and more embittered, until finally one day he stumped angrily into the kitchen and he exploded. "They done it again, Big Ma. Just look at my clothes." Big Ma clucked her tongue as she surveyed us. "Well, go and get out of them, honey, and wash them out. All of y'all get out them clothes and dry yourselves," she said, turning back to the huge iron-bellied stove to stir her stew. "Big Ma, it ain't fair." "Well, little man, it just ain't fair." Stacy and Christopher John left to change into their work clothes, but little man sat on the side bench looking totally dejected as he gazed at his pale blue pants crusted with mud from the knees down. Although each night Big Ma prepared a pot of hot soapy water for him to wash out his clothing, each day he arrived home looking as if his pants had not been washed in more than a month. Big Ma was not one for coddling any of us, but now she turned from the stove and, wiping her hands on her long white apron, sat down on the bench and put her arm around little man. "Now look here, baby. It ain't the end of the world. Lord, child, don't you know one day the sun will shine again and you won't get muddy no more? But, look, but Big Ma, little man protested, if and that old bus driver would slow down, I wouldn't get muddy. Then he frowned deeply and added, or if and we had a bus like theirs. Well, we don't. And you don't, Big Ma said, getting up. So ain't no use fretting about it. One day you'll have a plenty of clothes and maybe even a car you own to ride around in. So you don't have to pay no mind to them ignorant white folks. You just keep on studying and get yourself a good education and you'll be all right. Now go on, wash out your clothes and hang them by the fire so as I can iron them before I go to bed. Turning, she spied me. Can't see what you want, girl. Go and change into your pants and hurry back in here so you can help get this supper on the table. Time your mama get home. That night, when I was snug in a deep fury bed beside Big Ma, the tat-tat of the rain against the tin roof changed to a deafening roar that sounded as if thousands of giant rocks were being hurled against the earth. By morning, the heavy rain had become a drizzle, but the earth was badly sodden from the night's downpour. High rivers of muddy water flowed into the deep gullies and wild lakes shimmered into the roads. As we set out for school, the whiteness of the sun attempted to penetrate the storm clouds, but by the time we had turned north up the second crossing, it had given up, slinking meekly behind us the blackening clouds. Soon the thunder rolled across the sky, and the rain fell like hail upon our bent heads. Ah, shoot. I sure am getting tired of this mess, complained TJ. But no one else said a word. We were listening for that bus. Although we had left home earlier than usual to cover the northern road before the bus came, we were not overly confident that we would miss it, for we had tried this strategy before. Sometimes it worked, most times it didn't. It was as if the bus were a living thing, plaguing and defeating us at every turn. We could not outwit it. We plodded along, feeling the mud against our feet, walking faster and faster to reach the crossroads. Then Christopher John stopped. Hey, y'all, I think I hear it, he warned. We looked around, but saw nothing. Ain't nothing yet, I said. We walked on. Wait a minute, said Christopher John, stopping the second time. There it is again. Returned, but still there was nothing. Why don't you clean out your ears? TJ exclaimed. Wait, said Stacy. I think I hear it too. We hastened up the road to where the gully was narrower and we could easily swing up the bank into the forest. Soon the purr of a motor came closer and Mr. Granger's sleek silver Packard eased into view. It was a grand car with chrome shining even in the rain, and the only one like it in the county. So it was said. We growled. Oh, just so, Harlan, said TJ flippantly as the expensive car rounded a curve and disappeared. Then he and Clyde started down the bank. Stacy stopped them. Long as we're already up here, why don't we wait a while, he suggested. The bus ought to be here soon, and it'll be harder to get up the bank further down the road. Oh, man, that bus ain't coming for a while yet, said TJ. We left early this morning, remember? Stacy looked down to the south, thinking. Little man, Christopher John, and I waited for his decision. Come on, TJ persuaded. Why stay up here waiting for that devilish bus when we could be at the school, out of this mess? Well, TJ and Clyde jumped from the bank. Then Stacy, frowning as if he were doing this against his better judgment, jumped down too. Little man, Christopher, John, and I followed. 5 minutes later, we were skidding like frightened puppies toward the bank again as the bus accelerated and barreled down the narrow, rain-soaked road. But there was no place to which we could run, for Stacy had been right. Here the gullies were wide, filled almost to overflowing, and there were no briars or bushes by which we could swing up into the bank. Finally, when the bus was less than 50 feet behind us, it veered dangerously close to the right edge of the road, where we were running, forcing us to attempt the jump to the bank. But all of us fell short and ended in the slime of the gully. Little man, chest deep in the water, scooped up a handful of mud and in an uncontrollable rage scrambled up to the road and ran after the retreating bus. As moronic roars of laughter and cries of "Nigger! Nigger! Mud eater!" wafted from the open windows, little man threw his mud ball, barely missing the wheels by several feet. Then, totally dismayed by what happened, he buried his face in his hands and he cried. TJ climbed up from the gully, grinning at little man. But Stacy, his face burning red beneath his dark skin, glared so fiercely at TJ that he felt bad. "Just one word out of you, TJ," he said tightly. "Just one word." Christopher John and I looked at each other. We had never seen Stacy look like this, and neither had TJ. "Hey man, I ain't said nothing. I'm just as burnt as you are." Stacy glowered at TJ a moment longer, then walked swiftly to little man and put his long arm around his shoulder, saying softly, "Come on, man. It ain't gonna happen no more. Least not for a while. Not like that. I promise you that." Again, Christopher John and I looked questioningly at each other, wondering how Stacy could make such a rash promise. Then, shrugging, we hurried after him. When Jeremy Sims spied us from the high perch on the forest path, he ran hastily down and joined us. "Hey," he said, his face lightening into a friendly grin, but no one spoke to him. The smile faded, and noticing our mud-covered clothing, he asked, "Hey, Stacy, what happened?" Stacy turned, stared into his blue eyes, and said coldly, "Why don't you leave us alone? How come you always hanging around us anyway?" Jamie grew even more pale. "'Cause I likes y'all," he stammered. Then he whispered, "Was it the bus again?" No one answered him, and he said no more. When we reached the crossroads, he looked hopefully as if we might relent and say goodbye. But we did not relent. And as I glanced back at him standing alone in the middle of the crossing, he looked as if the world itself swung around his neck. It was only then that I realized Jeremy never rode the bus, no matter how bad the weather got. As we crossed the line, Stacy beckoned Christopher John, little man, and me aside. "Look," he whispered, "meet me at the tool shed. Right at noon." "Why?" I asked. He eyed us conspiratorially. I'll show y'all how we're going to stop that bus from splashing us." "How?" asked little man, eager for revenge. "Don't have time to explain now. Just meet me and be on time. It's going to take us all lunch hour." You mean we ain't going to eat no lunch?" Christopher John said in dismay. "You can miss lunch for one day," Stacy said, moving away. But Christopher John looked sourly after him, as if he greatly questioned the wisdom of a plan so drastic that it might exclude lunch. "You gonna tell TJ and Claude?" I asked. Stacy shook his head. "TJ's my best friend, but he's got no stomach for this kind of thing. He talks too much, and we couldn't include Claude without TJ." "Good," said little man. At noon, we met as planned and ducked into the unlocked tool shed, where all the church and school garden tools were kept. Stacy studied the tools available while the rest of us watched. Then, grabbing the only shovels, he handed one to me, holding on to the other himself, and directed little man and Christopher John to each take 2 buckets. Stealthily emerging from the tool shed into the drizzle, we eased along the forest edge behind the class buildings to avoid being seen. Once on the road, Stacy began to run. "Come on, hurry," he ordered. "We ain't got much time." "Where we going?" asked Christopher John, still not quite adjusted to the prospect of missing lunch. "Up to where that bus forced us off the road. Be careful now," he said to Christopher John, already puffing to keep up. When we reached the place where we had fallen into the gully, Stacy halted. All right, he said, start digging. Without another word, he put his bare foot into the top edge of the shovel and sank it deep into the soft road. Come on, he ordered, glancing up at Christopher John, little man, and me. We were wondering whether he had finally gone mad. Cassie, start digging over there on that side of the road, right across from me. That's right. Don't get too near the edge. It's going to look like it's been washed out. Christopher John, you and little man start scooping out mud from the middle of the road. Quick now, he said, still digging. And we began to carry out his commands. We only got about 30 minutes so as we can get back to school on time. We asked no more questions. While Stacy and I shoveled ragged holes almost a yard wide and a foot deep toward each other, dumping the excess mud into the water-filled gullies, little man and Christopher John scooped bucketfuls of red earth from the road center. And for once in his life, little man was happily oblivious to the mud spattering upon him. When Stacy's and my holes merged into one big hole with little man's and Christopher John's, Stacy and I threw down our shovels and grabbed the extra buckets. Then the four of us ran back and forth into the gullies, hastily filling the buckets with murky water and dumping them into the holes. Now understanding Stacy's plan, we worked wordlessly until the water lay by the same level as the road. When Stacy waded into the gully water and pulled himself up into the forest bank, finding 3 rocks, he stacked them to identify the spot. It might look different this afternoon, he explained, jumping down again. Christopher John looked up at the sky. Look like it's gonna rain real hard some more. Let's hope so, said Stacy. The more rain, the better. That'll make it seem more likely that the road could have been washed away like that. It'll also keep cars and wagons away. He looked around, surveying the road. And let's hope don't nothing come along before that bus. Let's go. Quickly, we gathered our buckets and shovels and hurried back to school. After returning the tools to the tool shed, we stopped at the well to wash the mud from our arms and our feet, and then rushed to our classes, hoping that the mud caked in our clothes would go unnoticed. As I slipped into my seat, Miss Crocker looked at me oddly and shook her head. But when she did, the same thing as Mary Lou and Alma sat down. I decided that the mud was no more noticeable than anyone else's. Soon after I had settled down to the boredom of Miss Crocker, the rain began to pound down again, hammering with great intensity upon the tin roof. After school, it was still raining as the boys and I, avoiding TJ and Clyde, rushed along the slippery road, recklessly bypassing more cautious students. You think we'll get there in time to see? Stacy asked. We should. They stay in school 15 minutes longer than we do, and it always takes them a few minutes to load up. When we reached the crossing, we glanced toward Jefferson Davis. The buses were there, but the students had not been dismissed. We hastened on. Expecting to see the yard-wide ditch we had dug at noon, we were not prepared for the 12-foot lake which glimmered up at us. Holy smokes! What happened? I exclaimed. The rain, said Stacy. Quick, up the bank. Eagerly, we settled into the muddy forest floor and waited. Hey, Stacy, I said, won't that big puddle make that old driver cautious? Stacy frowned, then said uncertainly, I don't know. I sure hope not. There's big puddles down the road that ain't deep, just heavy water. If I was to be walking out there when the bus comes, that old bus driver would be sure to speed up so he could splash me, I suggested. Or maybe little man. Or maybe me, little man volunteered, ready to do anything for revenge. Stacy thought a moment, but decided against it. Nah, it's better none of us be on the road when it happens. It might give them ideas. Stacy, what if they find out we done it? I asked Christopher John nervously. Oh, don't worry, they won't, assured Stacy. Hey, I think it's coming, whispered little man. We flattened ourselves completely and peered through the low bushes. The bus rattled up the road, though not as quickly as we had hoped. It rolled cautiously through wide puddles, some 20 feet ahead. It then seemed to grow bolder as it approached our man-made lake. It speeded up, spraying the water in high sheets of backward waterfalls into the forest. We could hear the students squealing with delight. But instead of the graceful guide through the puddle that its occupants were expecting, the bus emitted a tremendous crack and careened drunkenly into our trap. For a moment it swayed, and we held our breath, afraid that it would topple over. Then it sputtered, a last murmuring protest, and died. Its left front wheel into our ditch, its right wheel into the gully, like a lopsided billy goat on its knees. We covered our mouths and we shook with silent laughter as the dismayed driver opened the re-emergency exit and the rain poured down upon him in sharp needled darts. He stood in the doorway looking down with disbelief at his sunken charge. Then, holding on to his bus, he poked one foot into the water until it was on solid ground before gingerly stepping down. He looked under the bus. He looked at the steaming hood. He looked at the water. Then he scratched his head and he cursed. "How bad is it, Mr. Grimes?" a large freckle-faced boy asked, pushing up one of the cracked windows and sticking out his big head. "Can we push it out and fix it?" "Push it out? Fix it?" the bus driver echoed angrily. I got me a broken axle here and a waterlogged engine. No doubt, no telling what all else, and you talking about fixing it. Y'all gonna come out of there. Y'all gonna have to walk on home today." "Mr. Grimes," a girl ventured, stepping hesitantly down from the rear of the bus. "You gonna be able to pick us up in the morning?" The bus driver stared at her in total disbelief. "Girl, all y'all gonna be walking for at least 2 weeks by the time we get this thing hauled out of here and back up to Strawberry to get fixed. Now y'all get on home." He kicked the back tire and added, and get y'all daddies to come up here and give me a hand with this thing." The students turned dismally from the bus. They didn't know how wide the hole actually was. Some of them took a wild guess and tried to jump it, but most of them miscalculated and fell into it, to our everlasting delight. Others attempted to hop over the gullies to the forest to bypass the hole. However, we knew from much experience that they would not make it. By the time most of the students managed to get to the other side of the ditch, their clothes were dripping with the weight of the muddy water. No longer laughing, they moved spiritlessly toward their homes, while a disgruntled Mr. Grimes leaned moodily against the raised rear end of the bus. Oh, how sweet was well-maneuvered revenge. With that thought in mind, we quietly eased away and picked our way through the dense forest toward home.